So I want to talk about that and also the conservative leadership debate last night, too, which was, interesting TV show, we say. John Best joins us to do this. John, of course, is the president and the publisher of the Bay Observer. John, always a pleasure. Hope you had a good week.
I have indeed, Bill. It's nice to be with you.
Good to have you with us as well, and a lot's going on. I want to get into the provincial elections, certainly, of course, because that's imminent, and it's interesting the way things are rolling up. And let me circle back to that. I want to talk about the leadership debate from last night, of course. A number of takeaways from this, including the fact, by the way, that Patrick Brown chose not to participate, said it was more important to sell memberships. I don't know if that's going to cost him within the party or not. But the point I wanted to jump to here was something I used in my commentary earlier this morning on CHML. Preston Manning apparently sent a letter to all of the candidates saying, "Hey guys, tone it down." He says, you're insulting everybody, you're lambasting everybody, and he says the other parties are writing all this stuff down, and it's going to come back and bite you because they're going to throw all those quotes back at you with whoever wins this race. Mr. Manning didn't say that the Conservatives do the same thing when the other guys are in that situation too. But judging from last night, John, they either didn't read the letter or they didn't care. It was the usual backbiting, wasn't it?
It really was. And I was looking at Mr. Charest in particular. His campaign is interesting in the sense that he has decided that he is not going to play the game that the last two leaders have played, which is to try to sound like a real hard right-wing type of candidate and then get out in the actual election and now try to soften his stand. And clearly that did not work for Mr. O'Toole. And so it's interesting. He's basically putting himself out there as I don't know what you want to call him, a Brian Mulroney kind of conservative leader. And I guess he's gambling that at the end of the day, there are enough, there's still enough moderation within the Conservative Party, probably a kind of a silent majority that will accept that. And also with that more moderate stand, he's got a chance of picking up liberals who are frankly fed up with Justin Trudeau. So that's his game, and he's stuck to it. I hope they're selling memberships as well because Patrick Brown has got it right. You have to sell memberships. You can all these rallies, and they're all great, but at the end of the day, this is decided by very grassroots memberships, and we've seen that in the previous elections where very well-known people like Peter MacKay end up not winning and being deeply in debt. So it's a real there's a real choice in this liberal race, right, or a conservative race right now.
I would categorize Charest as, well, here's a phrase we've used before, progressive conservative, which is what the party used to be called, of course, before Stephen Harper took over. And you're right. I think Charest's gambling that those people are still there, but I'm not so sure about that, though, based on what's happened in the last couple of elections and last night. I thought it also interesting to see Pierre Poilievre and Leslyn Lewis almost, they were trying to out-convoy each other. I like the convoy best. No, I like them best. I was there first. You had, and on, notwithstanding the fact that, the polling indicates that 75% of Canadians thought the convoy was a bad thing. Yet they're trying to take ownership of it.
Yeah, I don't know how that stand gets you one vote that you wouldn't have got anyway. It's hard for me to see anybody that would be inclined to vote Liberal. I mean, obviously, if you're going to win an election, you've got to get people who didn't vote for you last time to now vote for you. And this convoy stuff, I think everybody that's for the convoy is already voting either Conservative or the Canada Party. So I just don't see any growth in it might work, again, internally within the party, but then you're going to get a situation like we've had in the last two elections where the leader caters to the conservative, the very conservative wing, and then has to somehow look warm and fuzzy for the voters. And it hasn't worked, and I don't think it will work. So the convoy, to me, is like a third rail. I just don't know why they'd want to go there.
Well, I don't know if they do the analysis, I guess, the day after, but and there's more debates to come. And we also know that Patrick Brown is a pretty good debater, too, and he chose not to, but he's going to have to get into the game as they move down the road toward that leadership. All right, let's get into the politics of Ontario right now. To the surprise of nobody, of course, Doug Ford went and saw the Lieutenant Governor on Monday and dissolved the legislature, and we're into election mode. This very next day, John, you saw the poll that was out that said the Conservatives had a 14-point lead, almost majority territory, and you think, okay, fine, these guys, they can almost put it in neutral. The very next day, a poll comes out and says, well, that's down to 7 points now, and the Liberals have surged ahead of the NDP. What's going on here?
Well, I think the reason the Liberal numbers are jumping around is because people are starting to learn a little bit about Stephen Del Duca, who was not very prominent even when he was a member of the cabinet. He's a very, his personality is very low key. He won't be accused of being overly charismatic ever. And so I think a lot of it has to do with people sort of parking their vote. I think Ford's vote is probably pretty solid. You notice that his number doesn't change that much. The only number that changes is who's in second place. Yeah. And so, he's got a fairly solid base, and I think voters are bouncing back and forth between, or people that are being polled at least are bouncing back and forth at this early stage between Andrea and Stephen Del Duca, probably trying to figure out who's going to look more like the winner of between those two. So, their promises are what you'd expect. It was kind of interesting yesterday. In both cases, Del Duca and Andrea made promises that would be very populist. Del Duca is going to hire 20,000 teachers. She's going to give out free, she's going to somehow accelerate, I guess, the free dental care. And in both cases, there was kind of pushback from people that you'd think were going to benefit from it. A prof at one of the universities said, well, there's better ways of improving education in Ontario than hiring people. And besides, there's not enough teachers in the teachers' colleges to create 20,000 teachers. And then there was a little bit of the Ontario Dental Association says they weren't even consulted on this dental thing. And existing dental initiatives need more funding. So these promises that are made on the back of an envelope can backfire sometimes.
What do you think of the buck a ride thing that Del Duca is promoting here? $1 a ride on public transit, and it's pretty all-encompassing, whether it's on GO Transit, even local transit. That's going to cost the government a whack of money, first of all, if he becomes premier and tries to enact that. But if the long-range goal there is to get people to leave their cars at home and get on public transit, John, they've been trying to do that for 30 years, and they've tried a number of different tricks, and it just hasn't worked. I mean, so what's the end game here?
Well, I don't know what the end game is, but I think it's bad policy, to be honest. It'd be much better to provide free transit to those who are at low income, but I think it harms transit really to cut the revenue down to that extent. I mean, that would roughly be 2/3 of most bus fares are up around $3 anywhere in Ontario now, just under $3. And you take 2/3 of the fare box away. I'm not sure that is going to bring that many more people to the, when you do the math, how much do we lose? How much do we gain by extra riders? I think it's just really bad policy. Much better to subsidize or even give free transit to those who need it. And let this transit system in Ontario has got to recover from the pandemic, and I think the way to do that is to make it affordable for government. And most people that are commuting to jobs can afford to pay what the fare box is now. So let's focus on that group and try to get them on public transit. Transit's got to grow in order for people to use it. It's almost got to be continuous. So I just think that was a bad piece of policy.
Because this is an Ontario problem. It's a national problem, really, to try to get people to use public transit. And we like our vehicles. And I find it interesting. that we've made this huge commitment now to EVs. In other words, buy this kind of car, but leave it in the garage because we want you to take public transit. There's kind of a mixed message there. But the other side of this is, and you and I have talked about this many times before, two things have to happen for people to actually decide, okay, I'm going to go on public transit. It has to be affordable and convenient. And right now it's neither. So there's a lot to do before you finally get people to stand at the bus stop or wherever it's going to be to hop on public transit. They just don't seem to see the big picture here.
Well, the price of gas this weekend apparently is, let's talk about gallons because I'm of that generation. It's now getting up into the $9 a gallon category. So transit at $3 a ride, or if you're getting a pass, it probably works out to less than that, significantly less than that. I think just on the gas issue alone, that's going to drive more people to transit than $1 a ride. So I think there's an opportunity here actually for transit to get a bit of a lift, but for that to happen, you're right. The convenience issue is important, and that means more buses more frequently, which means more drivers, more buses, more expense. So I think we've kind of got a situation here where transit has a chance to leap forward. And again, this dollar, that's not enough of an incentive for somebody. What will get people out of cars is $9 a gallon gas. What it will do
too. It's
and the convenience.
I know a guy who calls me on a regular basis on our program. He lives in the west end of Hamilton, up on the mountain. His job, unfortunately, is in Stony Creek, so that's the other side of the city for our listeners outside of Hamilton. And it took him an hour and a half to get to work every day, and that's using public transit. I had to get this and then transfer to this and then wait for this one to come. He says, I can be there in 20 minutes if I get a car. He says, it just makes sense. I'm not going to waste 3 hours of my day waiting for my ride when I can get there and back in a third of the time. And it just that comes back to the convenience issue.
That's the challenge that transit faces everywhere. And, certainly the blast system, if it were implemented, it would provide more direct connections east to west without having to go downtown and go into McNabb Street and getting off a bus and waiting for another one. The blast system is designed to at least partially address some of those kind of issues, but we're a long way away from even that. If you're running the HSR or the London transit system right now, your biggest problem is that these buses are running around with 5 people on them, and it's a big challenge to get people back on the bus once they've made other arrangements.
Well, exactly, and therein lies part of the problem. And you're right. I mean, there is the issue of the pandemic and the impact it's had on public transit, but it was a mess before the pandemic. And like so many other things, the pandemic really just exacerbated an already problematic situation.
Right. That's no question about it. And Ford, for his part, he's just he's in a good place, not only because the polls are favoring it, but he's in a good place because his message is so much simpler than the other two. He doesn't have to grasp at, let's try Buck-a Transit, although he did try Buck-a Beer a while back. Yeah. But he's really laid it out prior to the writ being dropped. He's going to build highways. He's going to get rid of tolls. He's going to fix his way of fixing housing is to basically take planning out of the hands of the municipalities. So you may not like these policies, but he's absolutely laid them out and he's running on them. And the public is somewhat familiar with them because not only they're not just hearing about them now since Monday, they've been hearing about this stuff for 6 months now. So he can kind of he doesn't have to lie awake at night figuring out what am I going to do to move the dial a little bit. He's already there, and I'm sure they've done polling on all of these issues. As much as people are screaming about 413, I'm sure he's done polling through those ridings and heard that congestion is a huge problem, and so he's in good shape that way. And
he is.
Barring a major scandal or a major hiccup on the campaign trail. He can do as he did yesterday, show up at Caribbean barbecues, and he's You know, he's got the bus. He's also got the simplest message. You know, this whole thing about can do, will do, the action. You know, there's sort of an action thing, whereas to counteract him, you have to kind of put out a negative message. So
Exactly.
from a messaging
That bothers
standpoint,
him.
yeah, he's up on.
That's something voters like to hear. John, we got to
Yeah,
leave it there. We're just about out of time on this segment. Have a great weekend, and we'll sure hook up again next Friday. A lot to talk about during the campaign, but appreciate your time today.
my pleasure, Bill.
John Best from the Bay Observer.